Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome. It's Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio with your hosts, Anthony Agati from New York.
And Luci Liebfried from Chicago.
We have a great show tonight, and glad you all joined in to listen. Luci, why don't you tell everyone how they can participate tonight?
Okay. Well, as always, our phone lines are open, so give us a call. The number to call is 661-244-9831. We have our chat room up and running, so feel free to ask us a question or stir up a debate in the room. You can also send us an email at paranormalreviewradio@yahoo.com. And be sure to check us out on Facebook.
Since the beginning of recorded history, man has sought to communicate the amazing wonders of the world, many of which are unexplainable or perhaps seem to be unexplainable. Many modern-day scholars like Giorgio Tsoukalos, Stanton Friedman, and William Birnes have made it their life's mission to communicate these wonders and expose the truths to the world. So are we guilty of choosing not to listen, or are we afraid of what the reality actually may be? Well, tonight we are fortunate enough to have on our show one of these brilliant minds I just spoke about. Dr. William Birnes is with us tonight, and for those of you who have been living under a rock for the past 20 years, Bill Birnes is a New York Times best-selling author, publisher of UFO Magazine, and the literary agent who has written and edited dozens of books such as The Day After Roswell, Unsolved UFO Mysteries, and The Haunting of the Presidents. Mr. Birnes was also the host of the popular and controversial show UFO Hunters on the History Channel. Bill's newest book, The Haunting of Twentieth-Century America, is what Luci and I think is a masterpiece and a must for all paranormal researchers and investigators in the world today. We'll discuss his work, his views, and his book tonight. So join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Birnes to the show. Hello, Bill. Glad to have you on the show tonight.
Hi, Anthony. Hi, Luci. How are you?
Great.
Hi. Welcome to the show, Bill. We're so happy that you're here. You know,
thank you. It's my pleasure.
You know, there are so many people out there, including myself, who love to talk and read about paranormal, and we venture to investigate here and there. But, you know, I want to ask you, what caused you to take it a step further and educate and be a top researcher and a scholar of the paranormal world?
Well, it goes all the way back to it's really not the paranormal world per se that drew me in. It was actually something else entirely. Back when I was teaching at Trenton State College 30 plus years ago, one of the things, and I was teaching a course in it was the neurological, biological basis of language. It was linguistics. And one of the things that I read back then was that if you're looking for truth, you always find truth. The best place to look for truth, by the way, is on the edges. So let's just say you're buying a used VW Beetle, right? Standard VW Beetle from the year one, mid-'60s, late '60s, that kind of a car. You see it on the lot. Oh, it looks all nice, shiny, great, doesn't use much gas, fun car to drive, and they are fun cars to drive. Well, one way you test a car like that is you put the handbrake on, and instead of just driving it, it's easy to drive any car around. You drive it around, you stop at a stop sign, you start the car, you know, it's great, starts, it's wonderful, I'll buy it. But to test it on the edges, you put on the handbrake. Do this with any stick-shift car. Put on the handbrake, and you put the car in reverse. and you bring up the clutch. If the car begins to move, albeit grudgingly and grindingly, you know you have a brake issue, right? The car should simply stall out. So you know you've got a brake problem. If you roll the car against a wall, parking lot wall, and put the car in first and slowly bring the clutch up, and the clutch begins to slip because the car can't move forward, the clutch begins to slip, you know you're going to have to spend something like $500 to $800 on pulling the engine, throwing in a new clutch, right? If you start the car in second and run the car and you're lugging the engine and the car is rattling and shaking, this is going to fall apart, you know you got a problem. So you look at the edges of what the car is not supposed to do and see how it handles things it's not supposed to do. Same thing with the map. You look at a Mercator projection of the world, right, and you see Greenland, and you see Greenland is bigger than Canada. And you say, what's that big? I never knew we had a thing like that out there. Well, that explains why in the center of a Mercator projection the whole world conforms on the map to latitude and longitude because you had to stretch it out at the poles. The point is, when you're checking out the truth of something, try to go to the edges, because it's at the edges where you find explanations of the truth. And that's really what led me in all the way back in the early 1980s. That's what led me into researching the paranormal, because paranormal experiences are outliers. They're off the map. They're at the edges of the map of the world of human experience. If you can understand them, it sheds light on human experiences. So things like near-death experiences and psychic phenomena and remote viewing and, UFO sightings and abductions and things like that, all those things go to trying to explain something about the human condition. And that's really what led me into that research.
Wow.
Okay, so we're going to talk about some of your views and actually some of those truths that you've been able to uncover. But I do want to get a question out of the way for the skeptics that are out there. What would you say to the people that think you're crazy and that your evidence and your research is not credible?
Well, first of all, one, that's a blanket statement. So when you say evidence based on research, you really just have to be specific. In other words, what evidence are you talking about? Evidence for the experience that our Air Force personnel had at RAF Bentwaters, Rendlesham Forest back in 1980? Experience about Roswell? I mean, specifically what evidence? Is it a blanket evidence of ghosts, blanket evidence of time travel, blanket evidence of remote viewing? Once you look at the specifics of a certain kind of a case, then you can determine whether the evidence is credible or not. I can go into many cases from the various books I've done and from the episodes we did on UFO Hunters and go through why the evidence is credible. Then what you do is, it's not a black or white issue, to answer your question. The question is the evidence plausible? And so what you come up with is a plausibility scale. And here's where the skeptical arguments usually fall apart. Because the skeptical argument starts with something like this. If you're saying that UFOs are real, that's an extraordinary claim. Well, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. Right now, there's no such thing as aliens. So you've got to, well, immediately, it's not an open-minded dispute at that point, is it? It's there's no such thing as aliens because an allegation, a claim of alien experience is so out there, is so far out, and so extraordinary, you have to come up with proof beyond regular proof to show that it's real. And that's a logical fallacy right at the outset. So before you even start the argument with a skeptic will say there's no such thing as an alien, therefore you really have to prove it to me. That's wrong. That's a fallacy. You don't argue like that. What you argue and say, fine, what evidence do you have, can you submit that shows that an unconventional, alien, otherworldly, paranormal, that there's a paranormal explanation for things, and what is the plausibility of that? Okay, and when you look at it from that point of view, you then have a plausibility scale. Okay, once you take anything, and this is a Stan Friedman idea too, that all skeptics begin with the argument ABA, anything but aliens. Once you take anything but aliens off the table and go with plausibility, at that point you can make a case for something being having an anomalous causality. And so that's how I argue with skeptics.
Perfect.
Okay, so with these skeptics, I mean, do you think that, how do you get them to believe, you know, I mean, we've got, you show the proof, you show the things that you've found, but I mean, short of a actual UFO landing at their doorstep, do you believe that they'll ever believe?
No, because it's, again, that's a logical fallacy. There really is no belief system involved. It is the evidence for something anomalous, is it plausible? And so really what the issue is not to say, oh, I believe in UFOs, you've convinced me that UFOs are real. You'll never do that, okay? Mm-hmm. And when you say short of a UFO landing, gee whiz, a UFO landed at RAF Bentwaters in Rendlesham Forest. UFOs buzzed the White House. UFOs shut down the missiles at Marston Air Force Base all the way back in 1965. UFOs shut down a Soviet missile silo. Christopher Columbus wrote about UFOs. George Washington saw a UFO. I mean, Ronald Reagan saw a UFO on 2 occasions. I mean, how much more proof do you need? None of that is proof, okay? Mm-hmm. What you try to do is say, you know what? If it's a belief system, I'm not concerned about your belief system. It's irrelevant to me. What's important is you lay out the evidence against what I'm saying is the plausibility of a UFO event, okay? And if I can show you physical evidence, if I can show you eyewitness testimony, if I can show you government documentation, if I can show you steps officialdom has taken to debunk it, then you should say it's plausible that something is there, because why would official government activity go to such great lengths to debunk it? And I could walk you through case by case through UFO history to make that clear, all the way from Kenneth Arnold in 1947 to Foo Fighters in 1945 to UFO witnesses in 1945 over the Hanford nuclear plant. I mean, we could go point by point by point. And as much as you say, oh, well, that's blank, at what point do you say, gee, the evidence is really there? I think they're mistaken, but the evidence is really there. Fine, if the evidence is really there for something, debunk the evidence, come up with a conventional explanation. If your answer is, oh, well, we don't know what it is now, but maybe someday we will, I'll go along with that. Then it's unidentified.
Bill, I want to get into this a little bit deeper. In 2009, NASA launched the Kepler telescope in search to find other, earthly planets in the Milky Way galaxy, and have increased its study to find life in other planets by using the liquid water theory. My question to you is this: do you think NASA and the scientists are sort of narrow-minded to think that, and this is sort of my theory or my little revelation, do you think that NASA and the scientists are sort of narrow-minded to think that the only way life can survive is with liquid water? What I mean is, I'm trying to formulate this.
I know what you're getting at. I mean, I know what you're getting at. They're really defining life in terms of our life. And saying if our life doesn't exist and there's no life, and you're saying, gee, that's a very narrow definition of life. The answer is, again, disappointingly, yes and no, okay? Here is, yes, it's narrow-minded. There could be any kind of life form out there, and our very narrow search for it would miss it. So that when SETI says, oh, we're looking for radio signals from distant planets. Oh, we haven't found any, so maybe there's no intelligent life out there. Well, for all you know, a culture that's, let's say millions, hundreds of millions of years old, has so progressed beyond radio signals that we may not get those signals until we've progressed beyond radio signals, and we're saying, oh, isn't that quaint? I love Lucy from another corner of the universe, right? So, I mean, on the one hand, you're right. On the other hand, remember, this is a lousy analogy, but it's an analogy. I was using it in the book that I'm writing now. Remember all the way back in 2004 or something, 2003, 2004, people were, the press corps said to Donald Rumsfeld, my God, this is 10 years ago, right? And they said to him, our troops are fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're fighting without this body armor. The roadside bombs are blowing up our Stryker vehicles. You know, the Stryker vehicle is supposed to be this, like, a high-speed combat vehicle. And they're blowing these things up. Why are you fighting a war with these things? They're, like, very vulnerable. And Rumsfeld's argument, which I don't like, okay, it was for that purpose a nasty argument. He said, you fight the war with the army you have, not the army you want to have. Well, it's the same thing with NASA. You look for life with the tools you have, not with the tools that you're developing. So what are our tools for looking for life as we understand life on planet Earth? Well, our tools are that we measure life in terms of, and we're talking about intelligent life, you know, as well as microbial life. For example, let's parse this question a little bit. We know that life exists off planet Earth. And I say we know that life exists off planet Earth because we've done tests on the Martian soil all the way back in 1976, and those tests showed, you could argue, oh, it was flawed, it was this. Those tests really showed that when the Martian soil was tested for various proteins, the returns on those tests showed the residue of protein. So there was organic protein reaction going on in the Martian soil. Hence, there was life. It's not human life, right? But life. But it was life. It was probably microbial life. We know that spores exist in outer space, and those spores landed on Earth during a primordial period when Earth was forming. It landed in our oceans, and those primordial spores began the process that began life on Earth. We know that in the Arctic there are meteors that contain the essence building blocks of life that landed on Earth. We know that Martian rocks, very early volatile solar system, Martian rocks landed on Earth, and those rocks contained life. They actually, I mean, it's no longer life now, but they really inspired life on Earth. So in a very weird way, and even Seth Shostak at SETI told us in a real oddball way, we're not Earthlings, we're Martians, because we came from Mars, okay? So microbial and bacterial life exists out there. We're pretty sure that it does. What we're looking for is life that we can communicate with, life that basically resembles us. They don't have to breathe oxygen. They can breathe. They can breathe methane. They can breathe other types of gases. They could be life that basically has evolved, like dolphins, has evolved in a planet that's mostly, well, we're mostly water, but evolved on a water planet. So there are other forms of life. There are intelligent life forms here on Earth that are, you know, dolphins and whales. Dolphins are intelligent. They communicate. They have language. They communicate on all sorts of ways. They are able to have social interactions. They have families. They have dialects. They literally interact with human beings, not just to carry bombs for the Navy, but they interact with human beings. There are stories of how a pod of dolphins protected this child. When sharks were coming into the water, the pod of dolphins circled around the child. I mean, what does that tell you? Is this a morality that dolphins have? I mean, whales support other whales when they're sick. I mean, come on. These are human characteristics of social organization, social hierarchy, bonding, and communication. So we know that happens on Earth. So you can extrapolate and say that it can happen on other planets. So how do we find it? We look for things that are like us. It's kind of like an anthropomorphic kind of analysis. You look for things in terms of what you are, because you can understand what you are, so you look for those kinds of things. So you look for planets in what's known as a habitable zone, a zone not too far from a star, not too close to a star. So it's not Mercury and Venus, right? And it's not Jupiter, but you look for that. And then you look for water, because we know that life began on Earth in water. And even in the most inhospitable parts of our ocean, the tips of volcanic mountains, miles and miles below, great pressure, intense heat, pure methane boiling up, boom, we find life. So because there's life in those environments on planet Earth, we look for, it's called exobiology, we look for those conditions in other planets, and finding more and more exobiological examples, exobiological phenomena on planet Earth, that widens our search on other planets for things that might exist there. So that's what NASA's doing. Again, you look for life in terms of what you understand with the tools you have in places you think you understand.
So why has the government sort of not fessed up, the U.S. government basically, not fessed up to all of the realities that you've just spoken about and the millions more that are out there to come forward and basically say, yeah, you know, we have, you know, researched the files and we have found evidence, and we are going to continue our search out into the galaxy, into our own world, into our own culture even, and you know, we'll include the world, and we're going to work with this person and that group and that country. I just don't understand why they haven't come forward with that. I mean, it's there. It's right there in front of their face.
Right. Well, the answer to your question is that, what do you mean? Well, first of all, you answer the question saying, what do you mean by come forward? Our government is not some monolithic block. I mean, if you understand what our government is, it's one of the most disorganized entities in the world.
Oh, I believe it, yes.
No, it's not some monolithic block. Our government, in things like, is there life on other planets? Is there life in the universe? What is our space program doing? It operates through proxies. And NASA, for example, that agency is a proxy. The various kinds of universities operating under contract to do research. These are all proxies. So it's not as though you'll see President Obama or Leon Panetta or Hillary Clinton or somebody, Joe Biden, stepping up and making pronouncements about life out there. What you're going to see are a variety of reports. The challenge to you, the challenge to our listeners, is to go out there and do the research among the reports. Some of the reports are really far out there. Some of them are more meaningful. But the data that you're looking for is all out there. It's all in various research papers, various academic journals, and they're all sponsored in many cases by the government. What you won't see is the government saying, oh, UFOs are here, they've been here, we're dealing with them, because there's no reason to do that. There's no benefit. Remember, the government's a bureaucracy, and the government, and any bureaucracy, one of the prime directives, if you want to use that term from Star Trek, one of the prime directives of any bureaucracy is to sustain itself. And a bureaucracy sustains itself by trying to keep one set of policies in place, evolving them as necessary, but not really changing the whole playing field every 5 minutes. So our government has a policy of protecting national security. From 1947 on, and there really is a great book, Richard Dolan's book on UFOs and the national security state in 2 volumes, in which Richard Dolan makes the point that from 1947 on, the United States evolved, and this is really very important from a policy point of view. He makes the point that the United States has gradually evolved from a republic, and this is very important to understand what a republic is, to a national security state. Jim Sanders, who wrote books on POWs and MIAs from Vietnam and Korea and World War II, The Men We Left Behind and Soldiers of Misfortune, he also wrote the book The Downing of TWA Flight 800. Jim Sanders is working on a book about the same thing, that the United States gradually shifted from a republic to a national security state. And what does that mean? Because this really goes to the heart of the whole UFO question and disclosure. Let's just say it was 1920, and the United States was a republic. In other words, it was, and what does a republic mean? Republic is kind of the English, the anglicization of the term res publica, right? Property, thing of the people. Okay, that's what the United States was in the beginning of the 20th century, a thing of the people. But very gradually, what a national security state is a national security state exists for the purpose of its own security. It's no longer the property of the people. It becomes less and less transparent. It keeps secrets closer and closer. It does things that may have to be kind of finessed and hammered and sanded into what you would call constitutional. For example, in 1947, the National Security Act was enacted, it passed into law. Harry Truman signed it. And the National Security Act effectively created a fourth branch of government, kind of a pseudo-branch, a kind of a pseudo ultra-constitutional, extra-constitutional branch of government called the National Security Administration. And I don't just mean the National Security Agency, I mean the entire administration. Director of Intelligence, National Security Agency, and this agency, yet another agency from the military, from the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army Intelligence, Air Force Intelligence, all that was kind of superseded by a civilian central form of intelligence. So you have the CIA, the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Security Agency. These are all brought into being. Their purpose was not to be for the people, res publica. Their purpose was to be to protect the security of the national state. So the United States became a national security state almost overnight in 1947, 1948. Now, what that means from a policy point of view, and remember, this gets sticky, but remember the thing about policy is that policy trumps truth. Okay, truth is defined in terms of policy. So if American policy, because of national security, is that we don't talk about UFOs because officially they don't exist, then when they do show up over Washington, the White House, the Washington Monument in 1952, our jets try to shoot them down and they can't. Thomas Mantell over Leavenworth, he tries to fly up to a UFO near Kentucky, and the UFO avoids him and he crashes. Right, a UFO gets into a dogfight with an Iranian F-4 Phantom jet over Tehran in 1976. I can go on and on. When that happens, because the policy of the United States is not to disclose publicly what it knows about UFOs, et cetera, it keeps it private, even though it may have intense discussions over UFOs. Policy, truth. UFOs exist. UFOs don't exist. UFOs are real. UFOs are not real. Whatever that truth is, that's filtered through policy, and then it really comes out through that lens of policy into what the government states about UFOs. And the government is really mum on UFOs, okay? Ronald Reagan saw UFOs on 2 occasions. Jimmy Carter filed a UFO report back when he was governor of Georgia. We talk about UFOs. We talk about UFOs in casual conversation. We use them for analogies. Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, President Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon. I can go on and on. Harry Truman, actually, in 1952, Harry Truman is actually on radio saying he's talking to the military about UFOs. He actually says, we know what these are.
Right.
What do you mean we know what these are? This is what Harry Truman said. This is not a denial of UFOs. This is an admission of UFOs. It's not an admission of what they are. It's an admission of that they are.
Wasn't
record?
Wasn't the Harry Truman? Wasn't the Harry Truman? I'm sorry, but wasn't the Harry Truman? Wasn't it a slip up and then he denied it afterwards?
It was a slip up, but he tried to walk it back, but it's there. Okay.
Right.
So the point that I'm trying to, and he had to walk it back because he dispatched General Samford, who was head of Air Force Intelligence in 1952, to say the whole thing was an illusion. But then 4 years later, the head of Project Blue Book, Captain Edward Ruppelt, writes a book in which he says that Samford was lying.
Right.
And he quotes Donald Kehoe as saying that General Samford, who's an honorable guy, was having a crisis of conscience over what to say. My point here is that reality. We all saw UFOs in 1952. I mean, I was alive. I saw UFOs in 1952. I saw the photographs. You can see them now. Go to the internet. They're all over there. It's on the cover of my. It's a photo on the cover of my book, Aliens in America: A Travel Guide to UFO Hotspots. You can get that. You'll see the photograph. We all saw the photographs. We all saw the movies of UFOs. The point that we saw the Paul Trent photographs from the 1950s, the Rex Heflin photographs from 1965. The point that I'm trying to make is the reality is in front of us. You don't need President Obama to tell you UFOs exist. What you have is the proof yourself, the photographic proof that they exist, that has sustained, in some cases, 50 years of debunking and still stays there undebunked. And yet the policy is that the government doesn't disclose any information about UFOs externally, even though in Michael Sword's new book, the government in UFOs in the government, it's a single volume resource for researchers. Even though in that book, folks can get it, it's out from Anomalous Press, you will see 450 pages of citations of government documents attesting to the veracity, to the reality of UFOs, yet the policy is not to disclose. So you see the disparity between that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned 1947, and you mentioned the switch from the government from changing from republic. Do you think that had to do anything with the Roswell? Well,
that's one of the points that Richard Dolan makes in his book UFOs and the National Security State, that in 1947, a bunch of things happened in 1947. One was that just from a non-UFO, what was going on was that the United States had emerged from World War II, and they'd emerged from World War II looking at the world very differently from the way it was in 1941 when we entered World War II, and 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland and began World War II. In the 1930s, first of all, we were locked in this intractable, first the Depression, then toward the latter part of the 1930s, the Depression turned into a recession. I can go into that in detail, but this is not a show about that. But the point is that we could not get out of that recession in the latter part of the 1930s. President Roosevelt made a big mistake, okay, which, by the way, is the mistake the Republicans want to make now, same mistake. That is, thinking that the deficits were too high, he began to rein in credit and spending and things like that, and what was a very gradual recovery from the Great Depression slipped back into a recession. This is a model of that economic that we're going through now. So that's what he did. And he found he couldn't get out. His big worry, the big worry of the government back then, was on the one hand, you had two major opposing forces in the world. One was National Socialism, the Germans, the Italians, and to some extent the Japanese, and they became the Axis powers. And the other force was communism, basically the Soviet Union. And here was the United States, really in the middle of two worlds. the United States Senate and Joseph P. Kennedy was thinking we really should support Hitler because Stalin is the danger. Because in the 1930s, everybody was very worried that there would be this communist plot to overthrow the government. Unions were communists. This is why you had that big Red Scare in the 50s. And so there was that whole block. The real enemy was Stalin. On the other hand, you look at what was happening in Europe at the time, and you realize this is a very warlike, a very warlike culture that's starting up of hatred of isms, fascism, and Nazism. Why would Mussolini invade Africa? What was there for him? Stuff like that. So Roosevelt was walking a very fine line and the other fine line was how to keep the economy, how to boost the economy. We had this tremendous unemployment. Well, the best way to end unemployment is to start a war, because all that unemployment, they go into the army. It sounds crass, but it is what it is. And so that's what happened. But we, in many ways, were unprepared for waging war in 1941 and 1942. We did the two things that really won the war for us. We did one, the British did the other. It's a long way of answering your question, but we did one, the British did the other. What we did in the late 1930s and 1940 is we were bombing the Japanese army as they attempted to get into Southeast Asia to get their hands on the oil fields in Southeast Asia, because you don't wage war without petroleum. It's that simple, right? And in order for the Japanese to win a war at sea, and that was how the Japanese traditionally fought their wars. They're an island nation. They fought their wars at sea, and they won their wars at sea. Control the sea, defend yourself. Control the sea, you can invade. But without oil, you can't control the sea. So we kept the Japanese from getting their hands on the oil fields, and in so doing, we kind of guaranteed that they wouldn't have the oil to prosecute a war across the Pacific. They wouldn't invade us. Now, and then in January 1942, we showed them we could strike at the heart of Tokyo, right? 25 seconds over Tokyo, the Doolittle raid, okay? We showed we could win that war. The Japanese knew that by early 1942. Now, in Europe and in Africa, the British kept the Germans from getting to the oil fields in Saudi Arabia. No oil, no prosecuting a land war in Europe. I mean, you could fight it, but by the time the Russians, the Soviets, defeated the Germans in 1943 and the Germans began their retreat, there was no more fuel to prosecute the war. One of the things Patton said was that when our planes were blowing up German army vehicles on the ground, they weren't exploding. They were simply, the bombs were exploding, and he knew the Germans had no more oil. So we knew we would win the war at that point. It was only a matter of time. But what we didn't have, which the British had, was a powerful intelligence service. The British had MI6, which is the Foreign Intelligence Service, James Bond. And what we began to do in the 1940s was we created the OSS. It was really funded by the Rockefellers, and that became an intelligence service. And the OSS was using movie stars and people like Greta Garbo was an OSS agent, and Marlene Dietrich, and they were all OSS agents. But we had no formal institutionalized civilian intelligence agency. So after the war, the Dulles brothers were, John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State. Allen Dulles was soon became the head of intelligence. A group at Cambridge called the Cambridge Four. Okay, they convinced the Dulles brothers to convince Truman that the United States needed an intelligence agency. What we found out years later was that Burgess and Philby and the others were actually members of the KGB. So in one respect, it was the KGB telling the United States it needed an intelligence agency, and then the United States basically formed an intelligence agency filled with Soviet infiltrators. Okay, same thing in Germany. Gehlen was, he was head of the Nazi Gestapo, And Galen became the head of West German intelligence, working with the CIA. That West German intelligence had been penetrated by the East German intelligence, and so the CIA, very early in, it was communist intelligence agencies that helped start the CIA. But that was one reason we needed an intelligence agency. Richard Dolan has another argument. Richard Dolan says that in 1947, and actually during the war, we encountered something otherworldly, and we had no mechanism for keeping that secret and researching that secret and really transforming the United States into a country that would protect itself, protect the people from a very, very awful truth about our relationship to planet Earth and what else might be out there. And you could just speculate all night long. And so gradually that intelligence apparatus, both military and civilian, through all levels, was designed to, on the one hand, research what the reality about UFOs was, on the other hand, keep the UFO secret from being disclosed, and also, on a third level, finding a way to marginalize the whole UFO question so that people like you and others like me would think about UFOs as products of fiction, something to enjoy, to laugh at, to watch Star Trek, and not think about it as a reality. And that was also a propaganda move on the part of the CIA, and that's all happened from the late 1940s right through the 1950s.
So, Bill, I have a question. So all of this, like with the intelligence and that, it brings up a question that I had. I was watching the episode of UFO Hunters that had to do with the silencers, and so the Men in Black. Is this part of that? Do you believe that?
Yes, I believe that there are. Men in Black. First of all, the name Men in Black, the concept of Men in Black, comes out of the comic book world. We know that, right? A series of comics. Mm-hmm. So, yes. But the truth that it might be based on is that there are individuals, and, we know who they are. Philip Klass was one. They're not people like, Will Smith with some exotic weapon. What they are folks that get out there. In some cases, they are cutouts. They're third-party cutouts. I can give you an example of what they are. These are people who go out and they try and find people who are, quote-unquote, as useful idiots, people who don't really know what they're doing but who have an ideology, and they convince them to do things. Basically to debunk UFO stories by setting up hoaxes to hoax the people who are writing about UFOs to show that the people writing about UFOs are idiots. So that's really what they do. In some cases, if you get too close to the truth, you'll get a very friendly warning, and then, aspects of your life are going to change. It's not as though you're going to be, let's just say, terminated, but back in the 50s, there were people who got pretty close who they were suicided. Their deaths were made to look like suicide. Some people say that entities working with government agents suppressing the UFO truth were actually extraterrestrials themselves, keeping their own secret from disclosure. So stories of what happened to Rex Heflin in the 1960s, about who took his photographs, who took the original photographs. They were very strange individuals, people showing up at the doorstep of Gray Barker who were able to instill fear. I've heard from Navy SEALs, from somebody from SEAL Team 6 who retired from the Navy, who was asked to, was brought in as a quote-unquote for a private security company to guard a crash site. Said that, told me that this black car pulled up to that site. He basically said, "I'm sorry, there's no admittance. This is government. It's dangerous, nuclear, biological, chemical." He said this car had tinted windows, and the window on the driver's side rolled down. And he said there was something in that car, human, looked human, didn't look like green-headed monster. looked human, but he said, we're wearing sunglasses. And that thing looked at him, and he said when it lowered its sunglasses, this guy's a Navy SEAL, he had a visceral fear that paralyzed him. The thing put its sunglasses up, rolled the windows up, and drove on. What was it? It's a story told to me, first-hand story told to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, Men in Black, what are they? Do we work with them? I don't know.
We did mention Roswell before. I did want to touch a little bit on reverse engineering. Now, you had worked with Philip Corso, who I think is an amazing gentleman, and you co-authored the book with him the day after Roswell. Do you, obviously I'm sure you do believe in reverse engineering, but what sort of technologies can you sort of simply explain sort of were born from that?
Well, according to what we think we know, and again, the whole point of reverse engineering was not to have this situation where one day there's no such thing as a laser, the next day there's a laser. That was never the argument that Corso was making. The argument was that in 1947, the Army discovered levels of technology in that crash at Roswell. And even as early as autumn 1947, the Army didn't know it was there. Remember, this is before the services split, right? The Army and Air Force didn't separate as separate branches of the military until August 1947. It's July 1947.
Right.
So supposedly Harry Truman, who was then president, still in his first term, asks the head of the Army to take the lowest common denominator of the technology they recovered from the Roswell crash and take it to some facility. He didn't say which one. He said some facility that was working on what the Army believed that technology was. Okay, so imagine, this is like, the argument from skeptics, a cell phone, an iPhone travels through time to cavemen, right? And that's a stupid analogy, right?
Right.
More important is an analogy of something that looks like something interesting, drops into our lap, so you go to a lab and say, what is this? Can you figure it out? And this piece of technology, these were pieces of what turned out to be what today we'd say are integrated circuits. So they take it they figure out, Bell Labs is working on something, we don't know what it is, but they're working on, because the government is funding all these things anyway, the Army Research Board and things like that. So they take this thing to Bell Labs, and these guys, Brattain and Shockley, are trying to develop a way to pass single electrons, we know what atoms are now, single electrons across a circuit one way. Why is that important? It's important because the only switch that we had for passing electricity through a circuit at that electron level was called a light bulb. It was an Edison tube, a DeForest tube. Milton DeForest invented the DeForest tube. It's a version of the old incandescent light bulb. Go to a hardware store. Now they're obsolete. They've been obsoleted by the government. But go to a hardware store, buy yourself an incandescent light, and that's exactly technology from the 1890s. Right? It's weird. Okay? But in a light bulb, current passes both ways between those two little conductors going up inside the vacuum of a light bulb. That's why when you drop it, it explodes, right? Because it's a vacuum. Air rushes in. So what's happening is current is going two ways. And once you turn a switch on, by the way, the current flows. You can't just stop it at each electron. But Brattain and Shockley were trying to find a way, an electron switch that would pass one electron across a circuit, one at a time, one way, okay? And a way to turn them on and off and do it blip, 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 because that way they figured, remember, back in the 1940s, we had analog computers, right?
Right.
And analog computers were run on what? Vacuum tubes, Edison light bulbs, okay? So could they figure out a way? And remember, they're not figuring out, they're not doing this ostensibly. They're not saying to themselves, wow, we do this, we'll be masters of the universe, kings of the world, we'll have a whole new industry. No, no, no. Much of what Bell Labs was doing was internal to Bell Labs, okay? Like our whole modern world of computing, Macintosh computing, the World Wide Web, right? All of that is based on, really, at its core are two things. Something called the C language in computing and something called Unix, the operating system. The Macintosh operating systems now, System 10, Mountain Lion, the new one, they're still Unix-based, Unix kernel, Unix shell. The point that I'm trying to make is that was invented by this person, Dennis Ritchie, at Bell Labs, and it wasn't meant to be a consumer product. What was going on at Western Electric and Bell Labs from the 1940s, even through today, was basically finding things to help them develop other products. So what was going on with just like the C language and Unix, they were ways for them to create programming for their telecommunications devices. Back in the 1930s to the 1940s, that's exactly what Brattain and Shockley were working on. More powerful, faster, more efficient communications devices by trying to get finding a better way to move current through a circuit. They couldn't do it. They were using silicon, and the silicon was just, they couldn't control the flow of electrons. They knew they were on the right path, but were missing something. Well, when they got pieces, and you're talking about wreckage, and were able to analyze chemically the base for what the circuitry was, they found out that it was a version of silicon. It was doped with something else. When they experimented with various chemical compositions, in late 1947, that's when they solved their problem. So that problem ostensibly, allegedly, came from the wreckage of the craft at Roswell. And by 1948, we had the first patent for what they called the transistor. By 1948, they had commercial patents. 1949, they had commercial patents. By 1950, people were walking around with what were then called transistor radios. Okay? So I mean, that really was the first type of kind of engineering from an extraterrestrial piece of technology. What Corso said was that the Army was so furious that Bell Labs took the patent for itself that they just took the rest of the Roswell debris and buried it in file cabinets. And it wasn't until Arthur Trudeau, who had bumped over from Army intelligence, got his third star, not going to go into that story, bumped over from Army intelligence in 1956-57, took over Army R&D, then a backwater command. It was kind of a way to say, fine, spend your 3 years here as a lieutenant general, you'll get a bigger salary, and then get out of the Army because you got Alan Dulles mad.
Right.
Well, when Trudeau got there, he realized what was there, this cache of debris. So he went to Senator Strom Thurmond, the late Strom Thurmond. He went to Strom Thurmond and said, look, this is great stuff. We wanted to, this is technology. And Thurmond said to Trudeau, it's not invented here. What I want you to, I'll give you money from the Armed Services Committee. We'll get you money. But you have to take it into American industry. He didn't tell them how. He just said, get it into American industry. We'll fund it. We'll give you the money for it. But it's got to have American patents. Okay? It's very important. I can go through the whole thing about the patent for the radio. Everybody from the 1940s knows what happened to the patent for the wireless radio. Okay? It's subject an hour-long thing, but it's a story for another thing. Who invented it, Marconi or Tesla? Throw a coin. Well, the Supreme Court said Tesla did, so that ended that argument, but why is the issue. So so that's what happened in 1957, and then Trudeau waited until he could bring Corso in. There's a whole story about their relationship, and it dates back to 1956-57. So he waited until Corso finished his tour of duty as a commander of a Nike missile battalion in southern Germany, and then finished out his year as Inspector General of 7th Army, and then in the National Guard as a reserve officer, then brought him into Army R&D as deputy, first as head of foreign technology, and then as deputy director of Army R&D. He was a light colonel. So the point that I'm trying to make is that all took place. Fiber optics, Kevlar, integrated circuitry, the computer chip, lasers, they all went to places where scientists, industrial scientists, were already working on those technologies but needed a jump. And that jump was showing the completed product, and that allowed them to reverse engineer back from the completed product to where they were. And the story of their transistor is basically the model for that.
Well, Bill, our show is called Paranormal Review Radio, and I would like to get into your new book, The Haunting of the 20th-Century America. I read this book in one day. I found it absolutely fascinating. The book touches on everything paranormal, and it's from all across the U.S. and abroad. You touch on dreams, sixth sense, teleportation, time travel, and the paranormal. And it brought up the question, why do you think that the sciences have not investigated these kinds of things to prove them, or do you feel that they have?
They have. That's my answer. They've investigated all that. And there are a number of books that are out right now. And I'm writing one of them. It's The Haunting of the 21st Century. It's coming out next year. It's the sequel to the book that you read. There are a number of books out and coming out that are basically saying, look, there's more in common between the paranormal and the normal than is uncommon, than is disparate. And, Paul Smith, who wrote the book on remote viewing, Reading the Enemy's Mind, there are a number of studies that are in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. There's a research by this person, Dean Braden, all of which says that when you look at the idea of another form of communication of the mind, that the mind is different and larger from the biology of the brain, that exists as a reality, that if you look at the statistics of randomness versus something that's not random, that's real, that the paranormal is real. Our problem is calling it the paranormal and not another version of normality. Look what's happened just in the past 12 months. We allegedly were able to send a subatomic particle back through time. We now know from, at least in theory, from the Heisenberg uncertainty theory, from and this is science. This is not paranormal. This is science. The theoretical physics and cosmology. We now know that different quanta separated by space, could be millions of light years, could be centimeters, separated by space, flip from energy to mass in unison with each other. Why these things are linked, we still don't know what the medium is. And then we discover the footprint of a Higgs field. A Higgs field, supposedly the Higgs boson, right? But it's an energy field. The Higgs field is supposedly an energy field that was created at the moment of the Big Bang. Go into that as well, but that would take forever. The Big Bang, and it's an energy field. And the question is that energy field a medium of communication? Let's say that it is. Let's say that, loose analogy, it's like water, okay? And you know how sound travels in water. Well, that's why we have sonar. So if one particle, one quanta, communicates with one or more other quanta through the energy medium of a Higgs field, that could explain communication, instant communication, over light years. Well, if that's science, suddenly the whole idea of things traveling faster than the speed of light, the whole idea of being able to travel into the past, travel into the future. Time is a continuum, not linear. All that becomes a version of reality. And if we in fact sent a subatomic particle back through time so that it arrives, right? It arrives in time. Literally, it's arriving before it was launched. That says a lot about our being able to break the speed of light. So this is exciting stuff that's going on, but it's going on in science, not the paranormal.
Right.
We're discovering aspects about the human brain, about how the brain works, where what we would consider things like, a sixth sense, is really biological. We're considering aspects of human sensations and feelings through neurological modes, nexi of neurological entities in various parts of the body that do things. So our whole understanding of molecular biology, human biology, theoretical physics, and cosmology is so radically transforming that what was the paranormal is becoming the normal.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? In the book, you also touched on Nazi Germany and how the Nazi Party was actually created out of what we call the paranormal world. So how did you research this, and was there anything surprising that you found about the party and actually about Adolf Hitler himself?
Well, people have known that Adolf Hitler believed in the paranormal. It was common knowledge among his closest associates, the people who worked in the Reichstag. And his generals knew it. They didn't like it. Remember, you're talking about professional military. But people like Goering and Goring and Himmler all kind of knew that. There was a whole extra normal, paranormal cult surrounding Hitler. Hitler himself belonged to, or at least was a devotee of the society called the Abraxa Society, dating all the way back to ancient Greece, kind of a Luciferian thing, in which it was kind of the philosophy of the self. It was extra normal, but it was like you could actually will, now we call that the law of attraction. And there was a basis, and again, there's a scientific basis for that in the Heisenberg uncertainty theory. But, if you think something is a wave, it's a wave. If you think something is a particle, it's a particle, which is the essence of the law of attraction. If you think it, it will be. So, but back in the 19th century, there was something called the Great Age of Spiritualism, where, it started from these two little girls up in Rye, New York, the Fox sisters, who believed they were getting communications from the great beyond, from the other side, from the other side of death. And that began this whole last quarter 19th century, this was after the Civil War, almost this cult-like fascination. Then along comes Madame Blavatsky, and Madame Blavatsky, in her own kind of distorted way, was talking about the nature of humanity, the nature of human empowerment, the nature of thought, spiritualism, and again in her own way. And then she inspired a group. This is again turn of the century now. Inspired this group of Russian women, and at the same time there was this novel that came out in the 1890s, I think, by this very famous popular novelist called, it's Bora Lytton-Strachey, okay, called The Vril. And the Vril was supposedly this force, like the Chinese Qi, right? The Hebrew Ruach.
Right.
It's the force of life, the life force. And this group of Russian women, and this is from Tsarist Russia, Maria Orsach was one of them, kind of amalgamated the theosophical teachings of Madame Blavatsky and the Rosicrucians with this idea of a tangible force called the Vril, and they became the Vril Society. Well, the Vril Society also believed that the Caucasian race, Caucasian/Aryan race, really came from another planet, and that planet was called Aldebaran. Well, you can imagine, as the German philosophical thinkers, Himmler, were looking for any piece of history they could tie to make legitimate the Nazi Party, the Aryan basis of the Nazi Party. They jumped on this idea of the Vril Society, and then began going, this is the whole story of Indiana Jones, right, the first movie, going all over the world to find artifacts that would make legitimate the idea of the Nazi Party, okay? And so that's really what happened, and those are the philosophical, spiritual foundations of the Nazi Party, all the way back in the very early 1930s. And that, you can imagine, that began, there were people like Carl Weiss, who later came to America. This really goes back, it's astounding. This one philosopher comes to America after the Nazis take over, and suddenly what was the idea of this Hegelian, they were called Übermenschen, right? Supermen, right? They would be like the leaders of the world. Of course, they had an extraterrestrial origin from the planet Aldebaran, and they realize it actually becomes Lebensraum, which is basically rid the world of Jewry. Weiss flees for his life, comes to Chicago, gathers around him people at the University of Chicago, believing in this kind of like self-empowerment of a country, and that National Socialist philosophy inspires people like Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Faith, all these people who become in the late 20th century the neocons, the neoconservatives, who write this manifesto called the American Century, the American Century being the next century. That inspires the whole Dick Cheney, George Bush political philosophy of like perpetual war, and we're seeing that now. These same people are trending up around Mitt Romney. So, I mean, it's not a stretch to say, whatever your political proclivities are and who cares, it's not a stretch to say that you know, those very same folks who brought you National Socialism are the ones now bringing you this idea, which, what's his face, Romney said, an American Century before the VFW. It stems all the way back from the early 20th century view of the idea of the Übermensch, which was taken by the Nazis, made spiritual, comes to America because their political philosopher was Jewish, teaches at University of Chicago, creates this band of academic devotees. They turn up to be the advisors to Dick Cheney and John Bolton and people like that around George Bush. That certainly failed, but here they are again.
Wow.
So that shows you, Lucy, how the paranormal affects the normal.
Right.
Yes, it does. It does. It's becoming clearer. I do want to touch on one other thing. You mentioned a lot of haunted locations, and that you've written about, that you've experienced. And can I ask you what one location is at the top of your list, and that paranormal investigators should make a point of visiting?
Well, for me, it's the White House. Probably the most haunted house in America. I mean, you have Abraham Lincoln, you have Franklin Pierce, you have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you have Lyndon Johnson, you have Ronald Reagan, you have Bill Clinton, Eisenhower, all talking, Harry Truman in his diary, all talking about the ghosts of presidents in the White House. Richard Nixon is communicating with Abraham Lincoln's ghost. And lest you think this is all just, legend, crazy Halloween stuff, lest you think that. When David and Julie Nixon Eisenhower, right, when they were on the Colbert Show, up pops Julie Nixon talking about all the ghosts in the White House. Out of nowhere. Hello? And she grew up in the White House.
Wow. Bill, we could go on and on. I mean, there's so many questions that we would love to get answered from you. I just want to end on this. You're currently the publisher of UFO Magazine at ufomag.com. I highly suggest everybody go out there on the internet. And
we give away free magazines, so come up and visit the website and, say, hey, get me a sample magazine for free. You pay the postage, I'll buy the magazine.
It's a great magazine. I highly suggest it. You're also are you still contributing to Ancient Aliens, the show?
Yeah, I'm contributing to a whole bunch of shows as a writer more than anything else. A bunch of conspiracy shows. I've got 4 books coming out next year on various subjects. And that's going to be the basis of some TV shows. I mean, one book is a very traditional book on mental illness. It's called Wounded Minds, and it's about post-traumatic stress disorder, but really as it applies to combat veterans. And it deals with the scandal at various Army hospitals about trying to undiagnose PTSD as a pre-existing, not to get too technical, as a pre-existing symptom, so the Army doesn't have to pay disability benefits. It really is a scandal. The other is a book called Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Feelgood is really a history book. It's about a doctor by the name of Max Jacobson, who was Kennedy's unofficial doctor. He was giving Kennedy liquid methamphetamines. But among his patients, beside Kennedy and Spiro Agnew and Richard Nixon and Sam Giancana and Frank Sinatra, he was what we're showing from records. He was a Soviet agent, and one of his patients was a CIA non-official cover officer, both in the White House. And it was how he affected President Kennedy's mentality that led to various mistakes in the Kennedy administration, one of which was Kennedy's performance at the Vienna summit in not standing up to Khrushchev because he was so overdosed on methamphetamines that he was sluggish, leaving Khrushchev, who knew, by the way, that this guy Jacobson was KGB and had actually raided Jacobson's Upper East Side office to get Kennedy's medical records that were on file there. So he knew this, right? And the CIA knew that he knew this. And that really led to the CIA's coming up with a decision when Kennedy was pulling out of Vietnam to pull the trigger. So it's a whole new take on the Kennedy assassination. It was the enemy within, and it's really the arc of this guy Jacobson through the Rat Pack, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, all the way through the 60s and the 70s, up to Richard Nixon. And it's how one person who literally was a serial killer, because he was killing some of his patients, how this person affected national policy. Just through a drug, liquid methamphetamine, that later became illegal, but at that time it was not illegal. So that's the next book that's coming out. Then toward the fall, there are 2 books coming out, one of which is the official guide to the UFO Hunters series, UFO Hunters Book 1, And after that is The Haunting of the 21st Century.
Those are amazing. When is the sequel to 20th? Well, when is 21st Century coming out?
It's coming out in October, so it'll be out September, October of 2013. It's really aimed at Halloween, the Halloween market.
That's great.
And of course, that book, The Haunting of the 21st Century, talks about the weaponizing of the paranormal. How the Army and the CIA took things like remote viewing and something called remote influencing and tried to turn them into weapons in the latter part of the 20th century, and succeeded. It's the death touch, the men who stare at goats, stuff like that. Real stuff, real stuff.
Well, Bill, it has been an absolutely amazing discussion with you, and we hope that you enjoyed it as well.
I had a great time.
We want to thank you for coming on tonight, and we really do hope to have you on again. I do want to tell our listeners again, your book, The Haunting of 20th-Century America, is out on the market right now. And how can they get the book, Bill?
Well, they can go to Barnes & Noble. They can go to Amazon. They can buy it in bookstores. They can get the e-book from Amazon, obviously, for the Kindle. They can get it from Barnes & Noble for the Nook. They can get it on either one of them for the iPad or the Android tablet. And you can also just order it in hardcover or paperback from Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
That's great. Bill,
That's
I want
awesome.
to thank you again, and we wish you the best of luck in your research and your future ventures. And have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Take care now.
Good night.
All right, good night.
Good night.
Wow, I mean, the information that has just flowed in for the past hour is just boggling me. I think I lost Lucy. Uh-oh. Lucy, if you're hearing this, call in. And I know you guys in chat have been listening, and you guys out there that were listening, you had some really great questions and some insights that I really wished that we had the time to talk to him, and that's why I think we're hoping to actually have him on again, because just, within just an hour and a half or so, we've only touched on a few of them, and actually we had to cut a few of our questions, so we're definitely going to try and have him on again. And one in particular that I was talking over with Lucy is we had on our show a while back, we had Ben Hansen from Fact or Faked. I'm not sure if you guys out there listening right now had listened to that show, but we had talked about sort of paranormal scams and how Ben and his crew on the show sort of funnel through a lot of the YouTube videos that are out there and a lot of the stories and get to the root of whether or not they're fact or faked. And in the midst of the interview, Ben Hansen had sort of revealed to us that he sort of has ties to this whole government and UFO history. And he mentioned about his grandfather who had a quote-unquote mysterious job. And he later found out that his grandfather was actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lucy, was he in the military or was he in the government? Do you remember?
I believe he worked with the military.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Because he mentioned something about going to some Air Force base, but I'm not sure if it was government related or not. And he would leave on these excursions and tell his family that he was going, wouldn't tell basically about what it was, and even very little to his great grandmother, or I'm sorry, his grandmother. And so the stories had been passed down from his parents to Ben in regards to what they had known about his career, his job. And it had to do with, and I think it even had to do with Roswell or the effects after Roswell. And some of the stories.
I think what it was, his grandfather was involved in the building of the underground facilities.
Oh, okay. I can't remember. I have to actually go back and listen to that show. But one of the things that I actually want to do, because Ben Hansen is so involved, and you don't really catch it so much while watching the show Fact or Fake, but he is so involved and heavily involved in UFOs because of his family connection that I actually want to get Ben Hansen back on the show and have Bill Birnes there with us to talk about it and to maybe see if there's some sort of correlation or some sort of overlap to some of the stories, because Bill has been around within the 50s. He knows a lot of that history and a lot of those stories, and I'm sure possibly Ben may even know some insight info. So I'm hoping to actually get Bill and Ben on the show. Hopefully in a couple of months, maybe we'll get them both on. I think that would be an awesome show.
I think that would be fantastic. I
Now,
really do.
Luci, I didn't get a chance to read Bill's book, which I am going to. So, Bill, if you're listening, I'm going to read it this weekend. But but you read the book, and you
yes.
were as soon as you opened the book and you were reading the first couple of chapters, you were completely amazed.
Mhm. This book it is called the Haunting of 20th-Century America, but he touches on everything. He touches on not only the United States, and he did mention about the White House being haunted. Some of the things that he has in the book are absolutely fascinating. I mean, he talks about the appearance. Abraham Lincoln is probably the most visible apparition that happens there. And Abraham, I guess apparently he appears, but he also appears right before there's a time of discord or maybe something happening. He has stories about like the Rose Garden, how one of the first ladies wanted to move it, and the appearance of I believe it's Mrs. Wilson who showed up, and when the gardeners started to move it, stood there, and they got scared and they stopped. He touches Nazi Germany. There's some theories in there that talk about very possibly a time machine. New Orleans, he talks about New Orleans, my favorite place in the whole world, about the hauntings in the buildings in the French Quarter, and how actually during Katrina that very possibly there is evidence of paranormal happening. So it is a really, really amazing book. I mean, you definitely have to pick it up. You have to read it. And then also, too, the book prior to that, I also bought that because I want to read it, and I can't wait for the next one to come out.
Well, they had, as I was doing research, they did have some good reviews on the book, but they also had bad reviews as well, and most of the bad reviews were from readers, commentators who have read the book. I think a couple of them were on Amazon.com. People can be pretty cruelish with their comments on things, and but Publishers Weekly and Brian Lumley, author of Necroscope series, both gave it good reviews. So it does have some great insight. It is very different, I guess, for Bill to come out with a quote-unquote paranormal book, because most of his work is on UFOs. And for him to talk about ghosts and sixth sense and dreams and stuff like that, it may be a little bit difficult or maybe weird for people to think that way about Bill, but he's got great insight. I mean, as you heard during the interview, and I was fascinated by it, and that's why I didn't really talk that much, because I love history. That's the one thing that I love about being a paranormal investigator, is learning history. And I was just blown away about all the amazing stories and insight info that he had. And I think Mateo in chat was actually mentioning that he was just dropping info bombs. He really was. It was just so comforting to hear that and having that background information and that support for all of the theories that have been put forth by him and by others. It's just great to have that foundation there, and you can debate it, you can, dispute it and say, what, that's not right, these people did it first, or that didn't happen. And that's good. That's what we're all here for, is for the debate on everything. But he had some great insight, and I don't want to keep boasting about him, but he's a fascinating man, and I think that was one of the reasons why we wanted to have him on here, because he's just full of knowledge, complete knowledge that is in that brain of his. That's just amazing to me.
Well, you know what? One of the things that really became clear to me when I was reading this book, everyone knows you're the UFO guy. That's your thing. My thing is the paranormal. Well, this book actually just opened up a whole new perspective on the UFO side that really, to me, to a person who's not really that well versed in it, it really opened a whole bunch of doors that just made everything interesting. I mean, talking about James McDonald, talking about the Heflin photos, all of these things, it just opened up like this whole new doorway. So, again, I can't stop saying it. I mean, you really do have to pick up this book. I mean, have an open mind and just read. It is amazing.
Well, we have some time. I noticed, Lucy, that there's a caller on the line that I do want to get to and pick up. Do you mind if I do?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, we've got area code 804. Hello, you're on the air with Anthony and Lucy.
Hi, good evening. My name is Hugh. I'm calling from Virginia. Fantastic
Hi, Hugh.
show.
Hi.
I was hoping that I might have a chance to talk to your guest, but perhaps you can investigate me yourself and relay some information, because I'm standing in my truth. I have UFO, paranormal, and near-death experiences with a lot of documentation on spirituality also running through my life. And if I can share my name, it might be of interest to your listeners, and in the archives it will just give a little bit of preliminary information. And I heard him mentioning presidents. I have that in common with some of the stuff that I've been through too.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Hugh, H-U-G-H. Last name is Traulsen. That's T like Tom, R-A-U-L-S-E-N as in Nancy. If you put a .com, it will bring you to a site, and if you click on historical articles, you'll see a front-page Wall Street Journal article from back in 1983 where I exposed the former federal government bureaucrat for fraud, who I believe was a CIA operative. Indirectly, it eventually resulted in the resignation of Jim Wright from Speaker of the House. You'll see the original memo, some attachments. The last item is actually a letter from President Obama to me dated July 7th, 2009, related to the economy. There's another site, creativity777.com, the same letter from the president, and there's a powerful poem titled Caring, Sharing, which is in the President Ronald Reagan Library back in the early 80s, too. I was falsely accused in a supposed assassination plot against President Reagan. And when you Google my name, if you look for an article entitled America's New Transformational Economy, there's a 18-page PDF file that can be downloaded from that. One of the items is actually a letter to me from the Carter administration. These things are just the tip of the iceberg. The UFO encounter was in the Hudson Valley sightings back in the early 80s. I was working at Union Carbide's world headquarters as a contract security officer, and there's some reenactments on YouTube, and I had one of those big triangular ships come right over the top of me as I was going into work at the main gate at the Union Carbide's headquarters about a little before 11 p.m. at night.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Hugh. And your information is out there. You've mentioned your website, HughTraulsen.com, and everybody go out there and just Google Hugh Traulsen, his name, and you'll find out information. So thank you for sharing that with us, Hugh.
Yes, and that, again, is just the tip of the iceberg. If either one of you investigate, I think you'll find more interesting things. I'm dealing with some paranormal stuff still, and some of it's sitting in the White House looking to be unwound.
Oh, great. Well, we'll definitely, this will be on our list, and Lucy and I will take note, and who knows, maybe we'll have you on at a future show.
Thank you so much, and again, a great show.
Great. Thank you, Hugh.
Thank
Take care.
you. Good night.
Right.
Lucy, I want to pose a question to our listeners and give them an opportunity to call in and maybe sort of share some of their insight. I sort of, as we were doing the research, I had this this question sort of popped up all over the place, and every time we research things on whatever the topic is on paranormal, there's always the question of the beliefs of people. And one in particular that I noticed that sort of came up time and time again when we were doing about UFOs was what do you think we should do if a UFO landed and aliens wanted to communicate with us? So I'm posing that question to our listeners out there and our folks in chat. If you want to call in, give us a call at 661-244-9831. And let us know, what do you think we should do if a UFO actually landed and aliens sort of wanted to communicate with us, or if they landed and they landed sort of in your front yard? What do you think we should do? And I'm going to leave it open-ended. I'm not even going to give an example or a what if or anything like that. I want to leave it open-ended. So if you guys out there want to call in or share in the chat, we're going to go over a couple of news stories on UFOs that we found that were pretty interesting. So until we get some callers or until we start seeing stuff in the chat about that, maybe we can share a story. So actually, I just want to get to one story first, Lucy, if you don't mind. This one actually was dated last week, and I'm not sure. I've seen it all over Google and a few times within Facebook. And there is the news about the triangular-shaped invisible UFO that was caught. And it was caught by actually a paranormal research group. It was caught by Laredo Paranormal Research Society, and they used their infrared night vision camera. I'm not sure if they were specifically looking for UFOs or not. I didn't catch that in the article. But they captured this in late 2011. And it's a video that shows basically a 30-second shot of a bright triangle-shaped UFO with circular objects at the points moving across the sky, and then it sort of goes behind a house. And the group they said they had it analyzed, and they say it is real and is a possible invisible UFO. And what I mean by invisible is that it was not seen to their naked eye when they were looking up in the sky. It was only until they panned their infrared video camera that there's bright light. And, if you guys out there are paranormal investigators, you know that when you're using your infrared camera, anything that gives off a light, either it's a flashlight or even spiritual that sort of gives off its own emitting light, whether seen or unseen with the naked eye, it shows up very bright. And that's what they showed here. And one twist to it, or sort of one thing on the other side to this, is Ben McGee, a geoscientist and an aerospace consultant and UFO skeptic. He's actually a part of the National Geographic series Chasing UFOs. And in McGee's opinion, he says all the signs point to this object being a Border Patrol drone with infrared anti-collision or identification lights. And that's his explanation for it. So check out this article online. If you want to Google it, maybe just type in triangular-shaped invisible UFO caught, or type in Laredo Paranormal Research Society. But I thought this was pretty interesting, and it may be a good debate to talk about whether for it or against it.
Anthony, we have a caller.
Okay.
Okay. Area code 780. Hello, you're on the air with Anthony and Lucy. Who is this?
Hi, Lucy and Anthony. It's Nell Crawford.
Hi, Nell. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. Finally get to hear your voice.
Hi.
We always see you online.
Welcome to the show.
I try and catch your show whenever I can, and I thought this one was just absolutely amazing.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's just the kind of show that I'm really interested in.
Oh, great.
And
so are you calling in for the question that I posed?
Absolutely. I think if aliens landed and wanted to communicate with us, I think we should welcome them with caution, of course, but any race that is intelligent enough to be able to overcome the speed of light difficulty and be able to travel through space has the technology and the brains that I think they're way past wanting to take over any world.
Okay, so I have a sort of sub-B part to that question.
All right.
Okay, so you're very friendly with them. you want to communicate. They're only here for a minute, and then they're going to go. You only have a chance to ask one question, and it could be anything. What would be the one question you would want to have answered from them? You know, it could be sort of like a life question. I mean, I'm trying to ponder that myself. You know, I sort of envision it and try and figure out, you know, if short of them knocking on my door and they're going to leave in 2 seconds, what do I want to have answered? And there's just so much that runs through my mind. I can't even think
I know.
I can't even think of it. I mean, 'cause it's, you know, I have technological questions, I have life questions, universe questions, galaxies, planets, and I mean, there's just so much. But
you'd need a month, never mind a minute. Oh my goodness, there are so many questions I would love to be able to sit down and discuss with a race who has more technology and probably a better understanding of life than we do, because we're just starting. I mean, our race is very young, compared to you know, the universe. I mean, we're just babies.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, we're babies.
So now I have a question. So why do you think they would come here?
Oh, who knows? Maybe to check up on what they seeded on Earth. You know, I used to read science fiction a lot. So I've read Heinlein, I've read, you know, all the good authors, and one of the stories that I do remember is that an alien race seeded this planet with, and, you know, that's how we humans came to be. I know that's just not a possibility. Well, maybe it is. Who knows? But there are so many possibilities out there, and there's so much that we have to learn yet, even about our own origins. You know,
we were actually going to ask Bill. One of the questions that we had was, and upon doing a lot of the research on this topic, that there's a huge gap in between the evolution of man and you know, the whole thing with Darwin and those studies and everything. Going from ape to man, there's just this huge leap, and some of the you know, some of the theories out there have suggested that there's been sort of an alien intervention, and alongside that, not only our physical bodies upright and how we are sort of today and how we progressed to this position today, but also our brains. There have been many studies out there that just cannot be explained how our brains have adapted from being within an ape species or an animal species to quote-unquote man, and that gap is just unidentifiable right now. And there's a lot of scientists who say that they have a definitive answer, but there's so many people out there that are on the opposite end of it, you know, negating that fact and proving it elsewhere. And so that was like one of the questions that I really wanted to ask him, and hopefully we can get a chance the next time. But that could be the reason why they may be visiting us, to sort of, you know, it's like a parent coming back to see their child. You know?
To see how their children are doing, because, like you say, Darwinism is all very well and good, but like you said, there is a gap that's not explainable. And I'm interested in a lot of things, and this is also one of my interests, is how did we become? How did we get to the point where we can build spaceships? How did we get our brains? How did we evolve? And, you know, from apes to what we are today. And there is that huge gap in our knowledge.
Right.
And, you know, when did we come out of the trees? And how did we learn all these things?
Well, there's also that theory out there, and we did the show very early on when we started doing radio, was about the 13 crystal skulls. And Bill had mentioned it just before. He was talking about the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, I think that's what he was talking about, or if it was the crystal skulls, I'm not sure. But the theory out there is that these crystal skulls, these 13 crystal skulls, hold the truths to where we came from. And many of the theories out there are inclusive of this alien intervention or this alien hybrid. And once all these skulls sort of come together, and I don't know if it's in the right dimension, the right light, the right time frame, whatever it is, and they all come together, we will see that truth, and it will be revealed to us, and it hasn't yet. So, you know, again, all of these quote-unquote paranormal topics and stories and fields are all sort of colliding together on the realization of life and who we are and how we came to be. And UFO is just a small part of it.
Yeah, and like they say, you know, there's more between heaven and earth than we're aware of.
Right.
And it's just an amazing time. I'm so glad I was born now rather than 200 years ago, where we can start to explore all these options.
Yeah.
And
thank
you.
I'm a huge fan
Thank you
of Phil.
so much for calling
TV.
now.
Oh, and it was so nice to talk to you too. Finally to hear your voices. And you have a great night.
And yours.
And I love your show.
Thank you, Nell. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got 2 more callers. Do we have time?
Absolutely.
Okay. Area code 408. Hi. You're on the air with Anthony and Lucy. Who's calling?
Hi. It's Mateo.
Hi,
hey, Mateo.
How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Absolutely fine.
Doing all right. Just enjoying the show. I just want to respond to Anthony's question. What I would do if they got here. I think that's a really huge question. There's too much fear involved with answering that question. But the question I would ask them about, like Mr. Anthony said, if I had one question to ask them, I would ask them about, like pretty much like the biblical text, like what Ezekiel saw and all the kind of hints that the many different Bibles talk about creatures from space. The Bible says that we were made from people in the heavens, and that could very well mean people from the sky. Just like King Solomon, there's writings about him having a certain chair to where he is able to go from continent to continent, and he's actually drawn maps of places.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm an avid watcher, and I'm getting Lucy into this, but I'm an avid watcher of the show Ancient Aliens, and throughout all of their series of shows, they talk about the Incas in Peru and those ancient civilizations, but then they also touch on the biblical aspect of things, and they correlate some of the writings and also some of the paintings. There's a lot of paintings out there that actually have depictions of UFOs in them that just cannot be explained. And, I mean, really, that would be a fascinating question. But would you pose it to them as sort of a question or not if it's the truth, or whether or not that the biblical text is the truth, or whether or not they believe it?
More or less, if it's the truth. Had they heard anything about that? I don't know how long their lifespan would be, but is there any record of them contacting people that long ago? Maybe contacting people by name like King Solomon and Ezekiel and things like that. And just like the ancient Sumerians, they say the people who made us came from outer space, and they made us to mine gold because it's a perfect conductor for electron components and it lasts forever. And I would ask them if they knew anything about that. Is that the reason?
Right. Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's just where do you come from? I mean, that's all irrelevant. And, if they wanted to come here to destroy us, if they were able to make it all the way over here, destroying us wouldn't be a problem.
I think they would have done it already. They visited us so many times. I think they would have. They've had so many opportunities. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done it already.
Absolutely. As soon as you started setting off the nukes, they would have went, no.
Right.
I kind of think that they're enjoying watching us destroying ourselves.
True.
I agree with that too, but there's also a lot of abductees that say that they want us to prevent our own destruction of ourselves and our Earth and stuff like that. So it's I have mixed feelings about it. But I'm sure if they wanted to destroy us, I don't even think we'd see their ships before we were destroyed.
Right.
It's that simple for them. So I don't think they're here to destroy us, but I don't know. I kind of have a problem with that because I'm just observing us for like science reasons. I think they do have some type of goal, if they are visiting.
Wow. Well, that's a great question. Thank you so much for calling in, Mateo.
Thank you, Mateo.
No problem. Thanks for another great show, you guys.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Have a good one.
Love you.
Love you guys, too. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. We have one more caller, and this is area code 770. Hi, you're on the air with Anthony and Lucy. Who is this?
Hey, Anthony and Lucy. This is Mike from the chat room, and
Hi,
how
Mike.
you doing?
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Great show tonight. I love Bill. I used to watch him regularly on, UFO Hunters, and I thought it was interesting. He had delved into the topic of ghosts, normally not his bailiwick, and I just like it when people, delve into other paranormal, points of view on stuff. I think it can be very illuminating. So, we were having a pretty good chat in the chat room about that. In fact, I don't know if Lucy noticed that, but one of the questions that I have for the general paranormal community is sometimes I think we compartmentalize our thinking a bit too much when it comes to the paranormal. I sometimes wonder, and I first encountered this idea when they were talking about the making of Close Encounters, because one of the consultants on that movie was Jacques Vallée, who is, of course, a noted ufologist, and he, of course, scientist as well. And he told Steven Spielberg, I believe, that he believed that UFOs were as much a sociological phenomenon as much as they were a scientific phenomenon, as in the beliefs of the observers seemed to play some part in how they were perceived by the observers. And we talked about the differences in the way they seem to appear, the way aliens seem to appear sometimes across cultures. I mean, there is similarities in many cases, but in some cases, say in Russia and those areas, the aliens are sometimes not depicted as, say, grays, but rather as large, giant creatures with smaller heads and things like that. And later on, there's a great book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, about this ranch in Utah that I'm sure you're familiar with, where basically the National Discovery, the National Institute for Discovery Science, Robert Bigelow's old outfit, used to, he is very much interested in the paranormal, so he started that organization to study these odd happenings. So he bought this ranch that was basically overrun with paranormal activity of every sort you can imagine. They had UFO sightings, they had cryptid sightings, they had ghostly conversations and ghost sightings. I mean, it was as if everything you can think of paranormally was happening in this one location. And so they tried to study it, but this phenomenon, whatever it was, seemed intelligent. It seemed to know when it was being watched. And so it would happen in places where they didn't have cameras set up and they didn't have their equipment set up. So they could observe it, but, either the equipment would get trashed or it was just not in the right spot. Right. And you had a lot of people who were highly credentialed scientists, many of whom conducted this study or participated anonymously because of the quote-unquote giggle factor that takes place in academia. But these were the real deal. They were studying this stuff, and they had no answer. They had no explanation for it. It was all very strange. And it got me to thinking, and this is really where I started to kind of have a paradigm shift of my own. And I don't know how many people in the paranormal community even like this idea, but what if it's all kind of coming from a single source? I mean, we have incidents of Bigfoot where it's not just Bigfoot, it's Bigfoot vanishing in front of people who don't otherwise have a vested interest in Bigfoot, kind of like the best UFO sighting, kind of like the best ghost sightings. People who don't spend their time thinking about the paranormal suddenly having a paranormal experience. So, it lends extra legitimacy to it. The skeptics can't say, well, you're just a fantasy-prone individual who was hoping to have an experience like this. It's not as easy to dismiss. And so I got to thinking, if some other philosophy and even scientific theory is valid that reality itself may well be what amounts to kind of an illusion, a kind of a shared illusion that our consciousness plays a part in shaping, then is it possible that UFOs, for example, and ghosts and Bigfoot and, you know, cryptids in general, and every Fortean, as we call it, phenomenon, you know, Charles Fort was the first guy to kind of start connecting those dots. You know, if the Fortean world were actually kind of coming from a single source, either a parallel dimension or another reality entirely that occasionally intrudes on ours. That's kind of what I mean. It's the kind of question I'd like to pose to guys like Bill and others who are noted names in the paranormal, because I sometimes think we have more in common than we realize, that it really isn't as regimented or as compartmentalized as a lot of the people like the UFO guys and the ghost guys and the Bigfoot guys and so forth would like it to be, because I think in their own way they prefer it to be like
it's easier that way, basically. You know, it's easier to separate it out and then study each one individually. And I guess, and I kind of don't blame them, because it's hard enough getting, you know, the scholars and the scientists out there to sort of believe in or get them into the feeling and the notion that, you know, paranormal does exist. And so you attack it individually, sort of smaller battles.
It's easier to get your head around it sometimes that way.
Right.
But I guess the big advantage to thinking about it from a standpoint of maybe it's all related would be this. One of the big complaints, I've got a lot of skeptical friends. I wish more of them were more open-minded, because they're also into imaginative things like science fiction and fantasy and comic books and things like that, things that require imagination and a little bit in the back of your mind that says, what if this were possible, you know? But there are many of them skeptics, and I think a lot of them had, you know, this is just me being an amateur psychologist, I think a lot of them had bad experiences with a certain particular Western religion that shall go unnamed, and they're terrified to let anything seemingly paranormal be possible because of that sliver of a chance that the one thing that they dislike so much and are afraid of, really, could possibly be true. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I don't really have an opinion. But a lot of them complain or object to what we are interested in, because in particular the stuff is not reproducible, it's not testable, it's not repeatable, it's not something that is part of the material world as we know it. And they have the standard model of physics, you know, that they essentially is their commandment, you know, that essentially everything has to conform to that expectation or it doesn't exist, it's not real. And what I'm saying, what I'd like to ask them is, what if there is a phenomenon that takes place, and it takes place erratically, and it's not reproducible, and it's not testable, but it does happen, and it does intrude upon our reality from time to time. How would you, as scientifically minded people, account for that? I mean, you wouldn't have a paradigm by which to study it, or even a language by which to explain it. And what if our greatest potential strides forward come from studying that area? We talk about reverse engineering UFO technology, for example. What if the next big step forward for the human race isn't expressly or specifically in technology and hard science, but maybe a graduation to what some would call spiritual, but what I would just call the paranormal? You know, you're talking about missing an opportunity to make an enormous leap forward on every conceivable level if you just rule it out because it doesn't conform to your expectations and because you're afraid of it. And that's kind of the big picture. I hope I didn't connect too many dots at once there, but I mean that's I mean, I'm blown away by the amount of information that you just unloaded here. I mean, and going back to what you were saying before about sort of that cultural perception determines, you know, how the UFOs or how anything paranormal is interpreted, and it's different within different cultures. Could that, in essence, and I'm going to throw this question out there, I mean, we only have a few minutes left to the show, but I'm going to throw this question out there. Could that be the reason why we have so many different religions? Yeah.
You know, I mean, that idea of this God or this, you know, other being, to them, they never knew, in ancient times, paranormal obviously was not common, was not known at that point. And so anything other than themselves, they created as being as God. And that could have been somebody in the UFO, that could have been a spirit, that could have been anything. And,
exactly. It could have been any of these. It's the full spectrum of it. I mean, it could have been UFOs. It could have been beings perceived as quote-unquote angels. It could have been a cryptid perceived as something else. I mean, you see these trends across all cultures where they had their own individual interpretation of the event, whether it was a religion or a legend or a myth, but it clearly influenced them. And so, like you're saying, our beliefs I firmly believe that our beliefs, if nothing else, have been very much shaped by our exposure to these things. And the question, is how much do our own expectations, our own conscious observation play a part in the way, again, theoretically, if this is an energy coming from another dimension, or another level of reality, what role does that play? Or us seeing it, the double slit experiment that they perform, where if unobserved, energy will behave, matter will behave as waves if it's not observed, and particles if it is observed. Why should conscious human observation play any part in the way matter behaves? And yet it does, and this is a physically proven thing. And I think a physically proven thing with shattering implications for the universe at large, and not just for science, but for the paranormal. You try to wrap your head around it. And you wonder if we even have the equipment necessary to wrap your head around it.
Right. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're at that level yet to even try to even understand it, let alone research it.
Yeah.
Mike, I think you have just thrown out some absolutely amazing theories there. And you know what? I wish we had more time to talk about it, but we have some business we got to take care of. But
that's no problem.
I want to invite you to call into the show again. I mean, it's been absolutely fantastic.
Anytime, Lucy. I just love the heck out of talking about this stuff and talking about it with like-minded, open-minded people. So, yeah, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to call in again.
Great, thank you, Mike.
So
and maybe we'll do a future show on that topic, because that is fascinating, and I love your insight on it.
I would love to participate in something like that. I promise you. So just let me know if you'd like me to do something with that.
Absolutely,
we will.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Well,
Thanks,
guys, and have a great night, a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
All right,
good night.
Bye bye.
All right. Good night.
Okay. I want to go to the Paranormal Review Fan of the Week. Okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, and this week's Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week is Jay Allen from California. And if you've seen our Facebook page, Jay did this absolutely really cool Wheel of Fortune thing that had Paranormal Review on it. And just a tiny little bit about Jay. He likes the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Ghost Hunters, pinball, camping, and, of course, Paranormal Review Radio. Congratulations, Jay, and thank you for being a listener.
Thanks, Jay.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of another show. We hope this show was as much fun for you as it was for us. I mean, we'd like to thank Bill Birnes for joining us tonight. This was truly a special show. Don't forget to check out UFO Magazine and his upcoming book, it's called The Haunting
21st Century.
21st Century. And also, too, which he didn't mention, he's got a new upcoming book coming out on UFO Hunters, too. So look for that. We do want to say a special thank you to Mateo for always being there and for calling. We'd also like to thank Cindy Jensen and all of her friends for listening tonight. And finally, we want to say thank you to all of you, our friends, our fans, and family who listen to us each and every week. Your support means so much to us. Please don't stop posting on our Facebook page because we love hearing from you. And if you like the show, spread the word. Anthony, thank you so much for everything you do that has made Friday night my favorite night of the week. And you know what? Okay, since we've boldly gone where no man has gone before, sound familiar? Why should we stop Next week, we're going to step back into the world of haunted places by looking at another one of the active sites that we have investigated. It's been featured on Haunted Collector, and there has been some absolutely frightening evidence that has been gathered there. Yes, we're talking about Saddamsville Rectory in Cincinnati, Ohio. Join us next week as we talk to Tim Brazil. He's a preservationist who was featured on the Haunted Collector episode. Tim is a member of a group who's working to restore the rectory, and he's going to share some of his experiences there, and it's very spooky stuff, so don't miss this show. So until next Friday night, dear friends, have a paranormal week, and good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio.